Hello, you're watching James. My name's James, you're watching me, and I'm talking about watches. Well, this year in 2022, one of my goals for my watch collecting was to find a vintage watch that I particularly liked, a vintage watch at a size that I particularly like, and something to add to my collection which I'm planning on keeping longer term. I've owned a few vintage watches in the past, but I haven't connected with them for one reason or another, generally because the sizing is a little bit smaller, but I wanted still to have a vintage watch in my collection. I really like the aesthetics of them, I really like the look of them, I really like the history of them. And I was able to find this Swiss-made to-sell watch on eBay for a reasonable price. And when it arrived, I absolutely loved it, but obviously being so old, being a vintage watch, from around the 40s or the 50s, it did not come on its original strap. And it came on this sort of canvas strap, which it sort of did the job, it worked, but I didn't particularly like it. And I thought, well, here's a perfect opportunity to use my limited leather skills to try and make a new watch strap, specifically for this vintage watch. So today is a video all about a new project, and that project is to create a watch strap for my vintage watch. Before we jump into the video, please be aware I am very much an amateur at making things out of leather. I really enjoy the experience. I really enjoy creating things. I really like customizing things, but everything I know about leathercraft is from watching YouTube videos and creating a few small projects myself. So please don't expect it to look perfect at the end of this video. Now, before we do jump into the video, if you haven't subscribed, could you just tap on that subscribe button? I really would appreciate it. But let's flip the camera around now, and I'm going to step you through the process as I'm making it and show you in a relatively short period of time what I have created for my vintage Swiss-made watch. Let's check it out. So today I'm jumping into the making of a custom strap for my new vintage watch. It's a to-sell. It's from the 40s or 50s. There's not a lot of information about this particular watch online, which is a bit of a shame, even this particular brand. But it's a Swiss-made sort of hand-winding watch. It's got a quite nice sort of look to the dial. I really like the case shape, love those lugs. And it's a slightly bigger watch for that sort of era as well. It's a 38 or 39 millimeter. So what I'm looking to do though is make a similar watch strap that I've made for my first automatic watch. It's like a bunt style strap. What it'll do, it'll allow that to have a little bit more sort of wrist presence. It's also a slightly easier watch strap to make than the more traditional ones. I have tried them in the past and they didn't come out very well, but then I've made a couple that look a bit like this and they've actually come out quite nicely. But what I'm going to do a little bit differently with this one is I'm going to have these little lugs that I've made out of leather. I'm going to stretch them out to about here so that there's a little piece of leather here and a little piece of leather here, just to give the strap a little bit more interest factor. So how I go about making one is probably not the normal way, it's just the way that I've come up with. I make a cardboard guide, and I've come up with that guide using three things, these three things here. Firstly, the watch that I've already made, or the watch strap that I've already made, because I quite like this shape, this length. It all fits my wrist nicely. I have this sort of plastic guide which I bought off AliExpress. It was super cheap, but it gives me a sort of a nice straight edge and a sort of a line to then use. And then obviously I use the watch itself as a guide to sort of what sort of size I want that to fit in amongst that strap itself. So now I've cut it out of leather, and I'm using a kangaroo leather. Kangaroo leather is fantastic, not just because I'm Australian, which may be a bit weird because it's our sort of one of our national animals, but it's a really nice leather because it has a nice fine grain, it feels really nice, it's very strong, and it's also very thin, which allows me to cut it twice. Which may seem a little bit weird, but let me explain why I've done it like this. Firstly, when you double it up, it gives you a nice surface on both sides. It now becomes a nice thickness as well that sits nicely on wrist. It also provides a nice easy curve there, which I can then grab the little buckle here and trap inside there without having to do a sort of what the more traditional way is you sort of fold that down and then you sort of blend it into it and do it that way. This way I find it's a little bit neater because it just sits inside of that fold, just like that. And then I stitch down all the way around the outside, all the way around, and then it's stuck together. What it also does is something else that I want to do specifically for this strap, and that is it hides these things. So here we got the watch. This is what's going to attach to the watch. It's going to go between the lugs there, and then it's going to sit on there I'm going to put, let's get this a little bit easier in focus. Let me lift it up for you so you can actually see a little bit better. So I'm going to have it sort of down, let's say about there. So it's got a little bit of a strap, same on the other side, just to give it a little bit more character. And how am I going to do that? Well, I'm going to cut a little slice into here. I'm going to poke that through. I'm going to flare this out and stick it and sew it. So then that is going to be inside here. And then when I folded that over and stuck it down, it's going to cover up that sort of attachment point. So that's a secondary reason why I'm doing it this way, that sort of double layers. So next step is actually sewing it all together. Let me show you that now. Okay, so now I've got the watch in place. I've created these little tags. I've given them a little bit of length so as to give a little bit of character. I have sewed them into the main body of it. I've sewed them all together, as you can see, so they're nice and tight. I've left this spring bar in there so you can see where it fits in, and then this one will fit there. As you can see, I've then put it underneath, split them open and sewed them in so it's nice and strong. So when this then gets folded over, all of that is going to get covered up nice and neat and tidy. Now to do that, I've used a few tools. There's a little thing here which you use the hammer to bang in the holes, and they give you a nice spacing so it looks nice and neat and tidy. There is another little pusher here which just sort of helps push the hole through, makes it nice and neat and tidy. There is a special waxed thread to use, and then you use 2 needles, and you use what's called a saddle stitch, which is basically just sort of stitching in and out just like that, and it creates a very nice strong stitch, and it'll never undo itself because it's not just stitching in like a machine, it's actually crossing over and crossing over and crossing over. So you use 2 needles on the ends of both sides of the thread. So the next step is to glue that down like that, put in the buckle, and then stitch all the way around, all the way down, all the way up to the top. So that's what you'll see in just a moment. So now I have glued those 2 sides together, so making one piece of leather. I have also spent a fair bit of time trimming down along here to get a nice shape both around the watch, but also making that sort of tab look quite good. Initially it was a little bit blobby here, it was a little bit weird here, and having this extra bit of a tab through here, or this little bit of a tangle here, has made it a little bit funny through here. But what's going to happen is now I'm going to put some holes in all the way around and stitch it all the way around, and that will both give it some strength holding those 2 pieces of leather together, but it will pull all those bits together as well. And it will also give a little bit more of an interesting detail to the actual wet leather band itself. I've also made a little piece of leather here to fit around, so that when it comes around, obviously it's got something to tuck into. So the next step, punch some holes. Okay, so now I've punched all the holes, as you can see, all the way around, all the way around. I thought this might be a good opportunity just to show you how exactly I do that. A lot of people do ask why and how it looks so neat when you do the stitching. Well, it's not me being neat, it's me using these tools. Firstly, use this little scriber, which you can adjust this little thing depending on how far out you want your stitch line, and you literally just run it along the leather, and it causes a little line on the leather. And then on that little line that you've now drawn, you use these things here, and you just use the hammer and you go pop, 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 tap it in. As you go around corners and things, you can use smaller ones that have less holes on them, so you can sort of work around those little more intricate areas. Now those are just used to sort of make a pattern. You can push through the leather a little bit, but then you use one of these things or something like this to push all the way through the hole, just to open it up so you can, just like that, so you can then get the stitch through. Now I'm just a very amateur leather crafter. You'll see these more professional ones do this amazing thing. They punch all these little holes and then they hold the leather, hold the 2 needles, push through with this poker and then stitch all at the same time. I'm not that creative, or I'm not that skilled in it, so I go around and actually just push all the holes just before I start stitching. As I go around now and do start doing the stitching, sometimes some of these holes, because they're leather, tend to start to close up a little bit. I can then just get this and just push it through again just to open up that hole and allow me to stitch. So next step is to stitch through where I've put all those holes. So now I've pretty much finished the stitching. You'll see I've stitched across here, which locks that in, and then all the way around. If you look on the other side, you can see it goes all the way through. So not only does that make it look a little bit better, but it also obviously joins those 2 pieces of leather together, and it really has pulled together those issues there and there, where this piece of leather has gone in between the 2 pieces of leather. It sort of made it a little bit lumpy there, but that stitching has really pulled it down and pulled it together, making it look quite nice. And Now I've deliberately used two different color sort of leathers here. These are from two different skins, both are kangaroo, but you'll see these ones are slightly lighter. These are offcuts off an earlier piece of leather that I had. I just thought it would look good with a slightly darker, slightly lighter. Technically they're meant to be the same color when you buy it off the shelf, but they've ended up being a little bit different, which actually I think works really well in this instance. Next step is I'm going to attach the keeper. Now this is going to wrap around here. Again, I'm matching it in with this leather, just so it just sort of breaks up that a little bit. So when it comes around, it's going to obviously stick through there. And then the final thing to do is fix the edges. When you look at raw leather, when you've put it together, you see it looks a little bit rough, a little bit sort of frayed. So what I've done is I've used a really heavy piece of sandpaper and just sort of sanded it around. That takes away all the weird edges, but it also roughs it up a little bit. Then what you do is you put a little bit of water on it, and then you use this burnisher tool. And basically it just sits in there when it's damp, and you rub back and forth, 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 and it heats up the surface, and it almost melts it together. I have to admit, I do cheat when it comes to this. I do have a burnishing tool that fits on the end of my Dremel, which is an electric powered tool, and then I just go bzzz, and makes it look really good. So the next step, what you're going to see is the watch basically completed. But what I might do is I might just stick that on camera there so you can see the edge of the leather. And then when I flick to the next shot after I've finished, I'll start with that so you can see the differences in the raw leather versus the burnished leather. So now you can see that I've burnished the edges, which is sort of fused them together and sort of melted them together, giving a much nicer edge to it. So all the way around, in through here as well as all the way. It just gives you a much nicer finish, much cleaner, and absolutely much sort of better looking. So here we have the end result. This is me done, finished, and I am pretty damn happy with it. It has come out actually better than I expected, and I'm really impressed with the skills that I've actually shown, especially since I'm not that great with leather. So to be honest, I'm happy. I think it looks great. And I think it really adds some character to the watch as well, adds a little bit of extra bulk to the watch as well. But obviously we want to have a look at and see if it looks okay on wrist. So obviously I've custom made it to fit my wrist. I've given myself a couple of extra holes just in case it's getting a bit hot outside. I can move it back and forth a little bit. Tucks in through there. Probably should have moved that keeper a little bit further that way, but it still sticks out, so it's perfectly fine. And it fits and sits on my wrist really nicely. That leather will conform a little bit more and more to my wrist as I wear it more and more, but I'm actually really quite impressed by it. And I like that it's got a little bit more character to it. Feels a little bit old style, a bit more vintage as well, so it certainly suits this sort of 40s or 50s watch quite well. Fantastic. I'm actually really impressed and pleased with that result. So let's flick back to me and I'll give you some of my final thoughts on my project that I've completed today. So this wasn't a particularly long video today. The actual creation process of this watch strap probably took me about 3 to 4 hours all up. I had to do a few sort of problem solving along the way. It was a bit of an interesting project for me today. I had a really clear image of what I wanted to look like before I made it. As I made it, it sort of went off track a bit. It started to look pretty bad in my opinion. I didn't like some of the features of it. I didn't like the shape of it. And it really took a little bit more effort than I was thinking in the first place to sort of shape it back, move it back, and sort of modify it a little bit to bring it back to firstly what I was thinking in my head initially, but also to suit the watch that I was making it for. And I have to say, I'm really happy with the results. And it's quite funny to have this idea, which I really liked, then to go completely off track and I wasn't liking it to the point where I was thinking about scrapping it and starting again. But then I was able to sort of drag it back and now it's actually better than what I had in my head. I'm really happy with it. I think it suits this watch really well, both the shape and the texture and the thickness of it. But I also think that giving that extra little bit on the side has really added to the watch. And being a slightly smaller watch, around that 38 millimeters, and because it's quite thin, I think it gives the whole watch a little bit more presence on wrist as well. I am really happy. Another project that I've successfully completed, I can tick it off my list. Alright guys, I really hope you enjoyed the video. As I said at the start of the video, I'm certainly no perfect person at making leather things. I just enjoy the process. I like being creative. I really hope that the video was enjoyable and perhaps sparked a little bit of creativity for you guys as well, and perhaps you'll give it a go. If you are interested in leathercraft at all, YouTube is full of plenty of videos showing you how to do things, how to sew, how to create projects. It is a great tool, this YouTube. Absolutely use it to its full potential. Thank you so much for watching. I really appreciate it. I'll see you in the next one.